inside the military's most secret unit. And I have some ideas about what this is going to be, but I'm not sure. However, friendly reminder, chat, don't type anything in the chat that's going to get you in trouble, okay? That's all I'm going to say. Carry on, and good morning.
Everything with that unit is very cryptic. And so you go through like a 40-day selection process, which is pretty wild. And then you go back to your unit and you get orders to come to the year-long training. And they basically give you like this super random email that's just like, show up at this parking lot at this time. Okay, you show up and you're hanging out in this parking lot. And there's a couple guys I recognize from my selection class that are them. And then Shannon pulls up. 2013, we both ended up going to Selection 4 and getting invited to the year-long training course to be in a pretty unique special operations unit. Combines intelligence folks with special operators. Still one of the few units that not a lot's known about.
You know what's interesting is a lot of special people have a very similar look. I'm not saying all of them, but it's interesting.
So I'll be a little bit cagey and not talk too much about that
unit. Good job. What was that? I missed that.
With special operators, still one of the few units that not a lot's known about. So I'll be a little bit cagey and not talk too much about that unit. It's kind of funny because when you go and you do the for the book, you do like the publication review stuff.
Yeah.
And like the CIA is pretty cut and dry. Like, hey, you can say what you did at the CIA. You know, like they gave me like one or two things I couldn't say, and then like DOD's like pages of like don't say this, don't say that. So yeah, but we both ended up there at that unit, and so we both recognized each other right away. But
Can I ask questions about that unit?
Sure. Yeah.
Just how did you get recruited into that?
So I was fortunate that on one of my deployments, I ended up working with them. So I kind of got exposed to what they were doing. And I already kind of gravitated towards that intel world. And so that's kind of where my head was. And I wanted at some point, I'd kind of set my sights on going to the agency next. Again, because I was interested in the intel side, but also I kind of wanted to be like a voice of reason, I guess the way you could put it, like somebody who had been there on the ground to actually like give real information to decision makers so that we didn't ever get involved in a disaster like Iraq again.
That's a really good place to come from. That angle he's coming in when he's saying like I wanted to kind of be the boots on the ground so that other people, noble thinking, that sounds like that's a good thing, right? I would say that's a good thing. Coming, his heart's in a good spot. Yeah.
It's kind of like my long-term goal. But I had an opportunity to work with some guys from that unit, and they had a pretty unique mission at the time. They were part of one of the task forces that was specifically going after just the foreign fighters that were coming across the Syrian border. My team was on the Syrian border, so we were working on that 05, 06 timeframe. And a couple guys came out, and they had a lot looser rules than we did. And they had a lot more money than we did. And they were like, yeah, but we're in the Army. And I'm like, wait a sec, like, so who are you? Because I was like, man, I thought I knew everybody. Like, who are you?
The budget is no joke. When you are Uncle Sam's patriotic, when you're Uncle Sam's favorite, the gear that you get is so freaking cool. Oh, it's so cool. So that's cool that he noticed that. That's cool.
You guys, and they wouldn't even tell me, and they're like, hey, email this guy when you get home, and we'll talk to you later.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that unit was
Christmas
until way
round.
after I was out.
Yeah, it's not. We don't really advertise. I mean, the unit doesn't advertise that much. They kind of find who they want. I think we've done some more like blanket emailing of like the whole Special Forces community or the whole NSW community now to kind of get more guys, because it's cool to have a super secret unit, but you still need people to like know to come to try out for it. So I think they're a little bit more upfront nowadays about getting guys to come try out for selection. But I didn't hear much about it at all. So that was my first exposure. But really, I didn't plan on going to the unit until we pulled out of Iraq the second time, because I had always just wanted to stay on an ODA. Loved it. I went from weapons to intel, and then I became a warrant officer.
Let's go,
so as
warrant
we were leaving
officer.
Iraq, I was like, crap, man.
Okay, so fun fact for any of you that aren't familiar with the United States military, a warrant officer, there's I think once you get, they're called unicorns. They're called unicorns in the military because you never see them. Not saying it's because they're not doing their job, but it's just such a small group of people that they're called unicorns. So if you ever hear oh, so and so's a warrant officer, you can say, oh, they're a unicorn, and then they'll laugh because it's kind of like a funny inside joke.
I'm like now, are we going to enter the peacetime army now? I was like, am I going to have to go sit on a staff somewhere now that I'm a warrant officer? And luckily that
you said the Air Force is planning on bringing them back. I'd love to see that. That would be.
That unit takes warrant officers. You can go try out. So I was like, you know what? I want to stay in the game. I'm going to go try out for this unit now. And so luckily, Shannon had done 3 Iraq deployments, and she had just done an Afghanistan deployment too. And so she had tried out for the unit. So we ended up in the same class.
So would you guys have been doing, or maybe were doing, the same job description?
Well, her job was a little more technical than mine because she had the SIGINT qualification. She had the language skills, and then Shannon was also a qualified humenter. So she was proficient in all 3 of those.
Can you go into a little more detail on human and SIGINT?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for the audience.
Yeah, so she was if you look at her Navy job, it's crypto linguist technician, and then interpretive.
That's what my parents were. That's what they were. They were cryptolinguists. Let's go.
Which means her entire job is cryptology. So intercepting signals, radio signals, cell phones, cyber. There's a cyber aspect to it as well. So she was trained in that. But then she had the interpretive. She had the language skills as well. So she specifically targeting the Middle East, Iraq, nice. Those types of Arabic-speaking countries. That was her target language.
So SIGINT, for those listening that don't know what that is, that's signal intelligence.
Yeah, signals intelligence, exactly. Yep. So that was supposed to be her main job. When she was over in Iraq, because of basically demand,
Joe Gunner, I didn't know there were women in the unit. There are... Obviously, he's not saying which unit this is. None of us know, right? He's doing a very good job being professional, being vague in the perfect amount of way. Very locked in, very good, very high speed. There are women in many units that are publicly known, not publicly known. It is very much a thing. Very, very much a thing. They are locked in.
She ended up just kind of fumbling her way into source operations because she understood the Iraqi dialect so well that a lot of the guys down there at the NSW task force that she was working with, so the intel enablers and some of the SEALs that were ASOC guys, they realized their terps sucked because we had terps from other parts of the Middle East. They're having a really hard time. And so they were constantly having Shannon check those terps work. And so she ended up getting in on the HUMINT aspect really early on. And then this is around the same time, I think, where as a fighting force, we were having an epiphany that there was a whole other side of the population that we weren't talking to because the Middle East is just so segregated between men and women. Mm-hmm. We were missing the entire, literally female perspective. And women in that culture aren't really regarded as anything, but at the same time, they're everywhere, So you have women that are in the room with...
Super interesting thing, for those of you that don't know. I wouldn't say it's super common with the Air Force, but it's not also uncommon. However, very high speed, good medics, you can think potentially IDMTs, which is a high speed, it's an enlisted provider in the Air Force, which means there's officers and there's enlisted, right? So there's people with an education, an official bachelor's degree who pursued the officer route. That's who they are. There's enlisted. That's what I was. And as in the Air Force, you have something that's called an enlisted provider, which means that you are enlisted. So you're down here. However, you can prescribe XYZ medication. You have a certain scope of practice. You can do certain requests, certain labs. You can do treatments, write medical reports, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying it's for all IDMTs, but across the branch, if you are a female medic, and you are super good at your job, it is not uncommon for, if you're super good, super sharp, that you, with a lot of experience, could potentially be attached to a special unit or a more high speed unit to say to go deploy in these areas, because when they send a group of male individuals, other countries have rules where you cannot touch or talk to other women, and that they can only receive medical care from a female. So that's also kind of an interesting thing that a lot of people don't know or think about. So you can, not necessarily be something super high speed, but you can get tasked to go deploy with one of these cool units, go do some cool stuff, and then, help in that aspect. So what he's talking about is very, very real, and it's just kind of cool to see it from both sides.
All the same bad guys we're going after. And so Shannon started working with a lot of the women's sources, because the women's sources wouldn't come in and they wouldn't talk to men.
So human, for those that don't know,
human intelligence.
It's human intelligence.
Yeah. So that's how she found her way into that. And then between one of her deployments, ended up going to one of the human courses to be, officially certified and blessed off on to run source operations.
So you guys are at selection for a special missions unit. I can't say the name. I won't say the name, but I mean,
Good job.
Dude, you saw her again.
I did.
I mean, so what?
Yeah.
What's your pickup line?
It was pretty wild. Well, she helped me. Everything with the unit's very cryptic. And so you go through like a 40-day selection process, which is pretty wild onto itself. And then you go back to your unit and you get orders to come to the year-long training. And they basically give you like this super random email that's just like, show up at this parking lot at this time wearing business casual or something like that. So you're like, okay, you show up and you're hanging out in this parking lot. And there's a couple guys I recognize from my selection class that are there. And there's some other people who maybe were in a class before us or behind us that are there. And then Shannon pulls up and it's like out of a movie. We make eye contact. We both I think we recognize each other. And she's looking at me and she backs into this other car. She taps the fender of her car on another car. And she's like, and so I just go over there and I'm like, hey, I saw that car jumped out and bit your bumper. Like that was my pickup line there, And then we both.
Oh my God. Oh no. Oh. Oh God. That's terrible. He lost his wife? Oh God. Well, he's reminiscing beautifully.
Both realized we were who we thought we were, and then we were both still in training. So we had a lot going on for that first year, but from that moment on, we were pretty much inseparable.
Can you talk about the selection at all?
Not really. There's all the typical stuff that you'll have in a ruck-based selection. So they also kind of follow the same pattern that like SFAS or Delta Selection follows.
Okay.
Where they're seeing how you perform individually. I'd say this one you're even more isolated in because they're recruiting for.
Wait, what? Hang on.
In a ruck-based selection. So they also kind of follow the same pattern that like SFAS or Delta Selection follows.
Oh, so it's not those units. Wait. It's not Delta or SAS? Oh. Huh. Okay. Got it. All right. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Where they're seeing how you perform individually. I'd say this one you're even more isolated in because they're recruiting from a population of soft guys that have already kind of been tested. You've already kind of have a decent reputation in your community to get the invite. So they know that you can kind of perform well in a typical team environment. And so they take you and they're going to isolate you and they're going to have you do a lot of the typical land nav stuff. But then there's a ton of other challenges that even with like some of the best intel going into it, like you just don't anticipate. And I don't want to ruin for anybody, but by the time I went, I had been in the Army for like 12 years, been to combat, been around pretty much every unit here and there. And there was stuff in that selection process that.
Interesting thing is a lot of people in like the super high speed high speed, kind of units. How do I say this? They're, I'd say more commonly you'd see them as late 20s, early to mid 30s is like the common one. Rangers would be the younger group. I'd say Green Berets can probably vary. However, for like these kinds of units, you'll see like late 20s, early to mid 30s quite often. Like for those who are going to try out for the selection. So very, very big thing.
That I was like, I did not see that coming.
Very
Like,
serious
that
individuals.
was really surprising and very well done too. So a lot of resources go into it. They challenge you in a bunch of different environments, and it's 40 plus days, and you don't really know when. They give you like a week time frame of when it'll be done. They'll be like, yeah, you can tell your unit you'll be back, between this day and that day.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah,
What's the attrition rate like?
it's pretty big. It's pretty big. There's classes where there's like one or two guys, that make it. My class wasn't that way. I think we had 10 of us that made it through.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of like a scaled thing. You go to a standard military base initially, and that's where you do all your PT tests, psych eval, and that's one of the first places where they're actually going to put you, like, they're going to polygraph you as well, because anybody that's in the unit has to have a TSSCI, and so there's a lot of guys that the psych eval and the
TSSCI, for those of you that don't know, is top secret. There's a top secret clearance. And I believe the SCI is secret compartmentalized information. It's basically just a super high up clearance. That means you're allowed to know a lot of things. And in order to do that, the polygraph, more commonly known as the lie detector test. Just for those of you that aren't tracking the acronyms.
poly, they're gone, and then they take you off to a much more isolated place. And then they take you to another isolated place. And by the time you're all done with it, it's kind of interesting. You don't know how many guys make it through your selection class because of the way they end selection. There's like a final event you do, and then you go before a board, and then you just kind of get put on an airplane. And so you don't really know.
They shuffle you from the board to the airplane.
Basically, yeah.
Holy
Do you even know if
like
you
there's
get
one other guy
picked?
maybe that you're in the van with, and you also don't really introduce who you are fully.
This sounds
that's
like
part
the
of
place
thing.
I always wanted to go.
That's what I said.
I've been looking for this place
like, this is
forever.
pretty
I
rad.
found you.
Yeah. It's a very unique place. It takes a long time to get into it, but it's a really cool place.
No matter where you're watching Sean Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.
You guys hear that? All right. That was cool.